My name is Phyllis. I'm 66 years old, and I live alone in a house I built with my own hands, brick by brick, just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Widowed for more than 15 years, I dedicated everything I am to my daughter Grace. And when I say everything, that's all. Time, sleep, knees, name, money. Have you ever heard unintentionally something that you weren't supposed to hear? And did that change your life? That's exactly what happened to me. A voice notification. A common ringtone on the cell phone. But when I played, what I heard was not a message. It was a plan. And what hurt the most, he went to recognize the voice of the speaker. If you've ever had the feeling that something was off, but tried to convince yourself that it was all in your head, I understand. If you've ever felt an emptiness in your chest for loving someone who doesn't seem to see who you are anymore, me too. And if you, like me, believe that time reveals who we really are, then this story is for you. Because what started with an audio, it ended with a truth that not even my daughter expected to hear. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. When a mother hears from her own daughter words that not even a stranger would have the courage to say, something inside it breaks. Not immediately, but slowly, inside, like wood that rots in silence. It all started with a simple notification on the cell phone. I thought it was some message, maybe a purchase order, a reminder, one of those short everyday phrases. But when I pressed play, what I heard was not a message. It was a sentence. The voice was my daughter's, yes, but it wasn't the Grace I created. It was another, one that spoke of me as if I were a burden. And the worst, with her husband, laughing, as if they were arranging something. I will not tell you what she said now, but I say this. After that day, something in me died, and another part was born. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you yourself put into the world, I beg you, stay with me in this story. Leave your support here with a like, subscribe, and listen to me with an open heart. Because sometimes, all a woman needs is to be heard, even when she no longer screams. At that time, I still believed that the love we give will come back just like one day. I had that faith. It came from my mother, from my grandmother, women who never had much, but always gave everything. I was born in Asheville, in the interior of North Carolina, and my childhood was made up of backyard with red dirt, patched cotton dress, and prayer before dinner. Even when dinner was just a thin broth, I never complained. I learned early on that God listens in silence, and that strong women don't scream, they just keep going. I married George Young. He was a truck driver, a good man, a little quiet, but who looked into the eyes. He lived on the road, but he always left a withered flower in a glass when he returned home. I had Grace at the age of 26, and it was the biggest scare and the greatest joy of my life. A little girl with his eyes and a crooked nose like mine. George didn't see her grow much. He died in an accident on I-85 on a rainy night, when Grace was only 4 years old. I was left alone with a child on my lap, and an overdue electricity bill on the table. I worked as a cleaner in public schools, and then nanny in wealthy homes in Myers Park. I've already cleaned the bathroom with cold water at 5 a.m. I've washed the sheets of a rich grandmother who treated me as if I didn't exist, but I never let my daughter lack anything. Grace has never worn thrift store clothes. I did. She took a good snack to school. I ate the rest of the rice from the night before, all so that she wouldn't feel the weight of what we were experiencing. There was a Christmas that I spent alone. She was in the school retreat. I tidied up the room anyway, put on the Nat King Cole CD, and ate a slice of pie that I made myself. I kept looking at the little lights of the tree flashing and thinking, one day she will remember this. One day she'll say, "Thank you, Mom." Because deep down, that's what I wanted to hear, that it had all been worth it. Grace grew up beautiful, intelligent, studious. She entered UNC Charlotte with a partial scholarship, but the rest was paid by me. I did extra cleaning. I agreed to sleep at the boss's house when they needed it, to save the money for her transportation. There were days when I only saw my house at dawn, and even tired when she arrived. She left a note with a cut fruit for her to take the next day. "Go with God, my daughter." He signed like that, always like this. When she graduated, it was one of the happiest days of my life. I wore a navy blue dress borrowed from Mrs. Carroll, a lady I took care of for 10 years. I stood there in the stands with my throat tightened, listening to my daughter's name being called. Grace Holland, Bachelor of Business Administration. I applauded so much that my hands turned red. She looked at me only from afar, waved quickly. I didn't care. I thought, She's nervous. You're thrilled. We always find excuses for those we love. Grace got a job at an insurance office, and shortly after, showed up with that Richard, a soft-spoken man but with a restless eye. I can't explain it, but I never felt comfortable with him. It was as if he measured everything I said. Talking to him was like walking into someone else's house. When they announced their engagement, I was the first to say, "If that's what makes you happy, dear, then I'm together." I paid for her dress, half of the buffet, bought the rings, and I even wrote a note that I put in her bag on her wedding day. "Remember where you came from, and know that I will always be your ground." She never commented on this note. After the wedding came the months of silence. The calls started to take longer to be answered. Sometimes she would say she was busy. Others, that life was too busy. But I clung to hope. It's a phase. It's just a phase. Now listen to me with affection, because this is the kind of memory that weighs, and yet we keep it. On my 65th birthday, she didn't show up. Neither she nor him. I sent a message the day before, asked him to come. I prepared roast chicken, made pecan pie, even decorated the room with some balloons bought at Dollar Tree. I was in a light blue dress all day, with my hair done. At 7 in the evening, Grace sent an audio saying that an urgent meeting arose and that it would make up for it later. It never paid off. It was there that I felt for the first time a little bit of ice inside my chest. Something that said, maybe she doesn't see you as a mother anymore. Maybe I'll see you as a weight. But I didn't want to think about it. God knows how hard I tried to push that thought away. No, there are things that we can stand in silence, but that mark like a knife. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever had to smile with your throat closed, just so as not to show the size of the pain? If you've ever been through a moment like this, comment below with a, "I've lived it," or a, "It touched me." Sometimes we don't need to say much. Just show that we understand. And I want to read you. Grace and Richard lived in an apartment in Huntersville, but said they were in financial trouble. They said that the building was going to undergo renovations and that they needed a temporary place. That's when they asked me to stay with me for a few months. Only until I put things together, they said. I didn't even think twice. The house was big, and even with my knees hurting, my heart still had room. But what I didn't know, it's just that, just until I put things right, was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something that was already being drawn behind my back. Something that, if I had known at the time, would have made me lock the door and swallow the key. But as we could imagine, right? When it was that love has become a strategy? When they arrived with their bags at my door, I tidied up the guest room as if it were the first time I had received an important visitor. I washed the sheets with lavender, left a new towel on the bed, and even bought an expensive soap, one of those that we only give as gifts. Grace said, "Thank you, Mom," with a hurried smile, and Richard didn't even look me in the eye. He went straight to his room, carrying boxes, talking on the phone. That night I prepared herbed chicken, creamy rice, and sautéed vegetables, the dish she always ordered when she was a teenager. I set the table with affection, folded the napkins, and waited. I waited a long time. They only went down when the food was already cold. She took a plate and said she would eat it in her room, because she was exhausted. He didn't even answer. There I felt for the first time that something had changed. It wasn't tiredness. It was distance. A distance that didn't come from the legs. It came from the heart. The following days were filled with small silences. Grace started to leave early, come back late. When I tried to talk, she said she was busy. Richard looked at me as if he were measuring, as if calculating. I began to notice that they spoke quietly when I entered the room. There was a night when I heard footsteps in the hallway, whispers in the kitchen. When I opened the door to my room, the noise stopped. I pretended I went to drink water. They pretended that nothing was happening. On Sunday, I asked if they wanted to go with me to church. Grace replied with a, "Maybe next time," and went back to her cell phone. That week, I scheduled to make my apple pie. It was tradition. She always said she was the best in the world. I prepared everything with care. I let it cool in the window, just like my grandmother did. When she came home from work, she didn't even comment, nor did he prove it. I got the impression that she avoided even smelling it, as if the memory of childhood now bothers her. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. She must be stressed, I thought. They are adapting. It's just a phase. But inside, something was beginning to wither. It was like taking care of a plant that has already decided to dry up. On a Tuesday night, I tried to start a conversation in the kitchen. I told her about a neighbor who had her grandson by surprise. I told her about a friend from church who had cancer. Grace looked up from her phone and said, "Mom, you talk too much." It was only 3 words, but I felt like I had been slapped. I went to my room and cried softly, but not even out of anger. It was of nostalgia. I miss my daughter. The one who wrote notes with a colored pen, who asked me to hold me even after I was 10, who said she wanted to live with me forever. Where did that girl go? I began to notice the details. Richard walked around the house too freely. He opened my cupboards, moved the glasses, called a friend to see something in the plumbing. One day, without asking me, he brought a guy to install faster internet. "You'll like it," he said. But they never asked me if I wanted to. It was as if the house was no longer mine, as if I were occupying their space. On Friday, I decided to have a special dinner. I tried to rescue some connection. I made lasagna, prepared the table with candles, put on very low instrumental music, the kind she liked to listen to while studying. I waited until 9. They arrived late. They had already eaten. "Sorry, Mom. We went to Olive Garden with the people at work. They didn't even look at the table set. They didn't even notice the candles." It was on that day that I couldn't contain it. I went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. I stayed there, in silence. The penny started to drop, piece by piece. I was no longer seen, only tolerated, and maybe not even that. When it was that I stopped being a mother and became a nuisance. But the worst was yet to come, because everything I felt these days, it was still just the beginning. It was still not even a shadow of the pain I would feel when pressing play on that message. Have you ever had the impression that someone's silence hides more than speech? Then wait until you hear what that audio said. When they said they would only come for a few months, I believed it. Grace hugged me in the hallway and spoke in that sweet tone she only used when she wanted to calm my heart. "It's only until the building is done, Mom. We will take advantage of this time to be closer to you." At the time, my eyes filled with water. I thought it was God giving me the chance to have my daughter around again. I even said, "Then let's have family dinners, just like in the old days." She smiled and said yes. But that yes, today I see that it already came with a hidden expiration date. For the first few days, I tried to believe in the promise. I prepared breakfast as I did when she was a child. He left the table set, cut the fruits, heated the bread in the pan with butter. Richard would go downstairs, look at the plate, and say, "Don't you have scrambled eggs?" I smiled, got up slowly, and did it. He ate in silence, playing with his cell phone. Grace left early and came back late, always saying, "Was pulled at work." But on Instagram I saw the photos. Wine with friends, new restaurant in South End, laughter at meetings. It showed me a world that I was not part of. The house was changing too. One day, I came home from Mass, and the shelf in the living room was different. My picture frames were gone. My books were stacked in a box. Grace said, "We made it cleaner, Mom. It's more modern like this." Richard took out the flowery carpet and put on a gray one, which he called minimalist. Each small change took a little piece of my story. It was as if they were erasing me, room by room. In the bathroom, he complained about the water pressure. In the guest room, from the mattress. In the kitchen, from the stove. He said he was going to call someone to improve this here. And I, who worked my whole life to keep that house standing, kept looking and thinking, do they think I'm worth nothing else? Grace started working from home 2 days a week. One day, I went in without knocking to offer coffee, and she said loudly, "Mom, I already said that this gets in the way." I was embarrassed, apologized. I returned to my room with the tray in my hand, and my heart crushed. How can you be a guest inside your own home? Because that's what I was becoming. I washed, ironed, cooked, but walked in silence. I waited for the house to empty to move my things. He avoided staying in the room. I hid in the room when they were watching TV. And the worst, I started to think this was normal. One night, I heard them laughing in the room. A muffled, dry laugh. I don't know why, but a chill went down my spine. That laughter was not that of a happy couple. It was for someone who combined something hidden. The next day, Richard came up with a strange conversation. Have you ever thought about adapting the house to the age? Like putting bars in the bathroom, non-slip mats? I replied that I was fine, that he still climbed stairs, carried bags, and swept the yard. He gave a crooked smile and said, "Just a precaution." I thought it was strange, too strange. It was around this time that a woman called asking about my vacancy in the Concord senior residence. I said it must be a mistake. She apologized and hung up, but the flea was behind the ear. The following Sunday, in church, I prayed as I had not done in a long time. I didn't ask for an answer. I asked for eyes. I asked God to let me see, because something was being planned, and I felt it. I can't explain how, but I knew that when I found out, there would be no turning back. Anyway, what kind of daughter hides this kind of laughter? That night, I just wanted to pick up some mint leaves in the backyard to make some tea. It was around 8 o'clock at night, and I had left the back door ajar. When I returned, I heard Richard's voice coming from the room in a low but direct tone. He said, "She doesn't even realize what we're doing. I've already spoken to Carol from County Clerk. Everything is ready." My body froze. I stood behind the door, my hand still smelling the leaf. The silence between one sentence and another was louder than screaming. When I stepped in, the conversation stopped right away. The two were sitting on the couch, and Grace was fiddling with her phone as if she hadn't heard anything. "Ah, Mom, were you out there all this time?" I said yes, that I went to pick mint, but my voice was no longer the same. I had a tremor. I felt it. Something was being plotted, with my name in the middle, and it wasn't good. In the following days, my house became an in and out of strangers. First, a man in a tie appeared, whom Richard introduced as a senior wellness expert. He said it was a new service that evaluated the routine of the elderly to prevent accidents. I found it invasive. He asked if I needed help to take a shower, if I had already fallen, if I forgot dates. I answered calmly, but inside, I burned. 2 days later, another guy arrived, this time with a clipboard. "I'm a real estate appraiser. I came to do a quick inspection." I stood in the hallway, watching the man open cabinets, take pictures of the rooms, measure walls. Grace said it was to keep the house registered with the updated data. I wanted to ask, updated for whom? But I kept quiet. That's when I started my notebook, an old pad that was hidden in the second drawer of the dresser, under my nightgowns. I wrote everything: names, dates, times, words that seemed strange to me. Everything. The following week, I noticed that Grace spent a lot of time on the computer. At night, she printed papers, stapled them, and left them in a brown folder. He never showed me. One day, I saw her with this briefcase under her arm leaving in a hurry. On the same day, Richard appeared with another man, this time in a blue uniform. He came to see the electrical part, Mom. It's a preventive checkup. I didn't even answer anymore. I just watched. The feeling was that I was living a movie where everyone had already read the script, except me. I felt watched, measured, studied. I spoke, and they exchanged glances. I coughed, and Richard asked if I was too well. Even the drawers began to be rearranged without me asking. One day, my accounts were in a different folder. Grace said that it was to make it easier to control, but who always took care of those accounts? It was me. And it was during this period that a question kept popping into my head. Why so much sudden care? Why this rush to evaluate everything? And what were they talking about with that Carol? It's strange when we start to distrust who we created. Hurts. It hurts more than any betrayal of a friend, a husband, the world, because it's blood, it's memory, it's a name. And if you're here, listening to this story, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm here opening my heart, telling something that I kept even from myself for years. And if there's someone on the other side, listening to me with respect, this already consoles me. I still have a lot of things in store to share with you, but let me tell you, it was there, in the middle of this silent dance of lies and appearances, that the day of the audio has arrived. The message, that notification that changed everything. Have you ever wondered what happens when a mother hears her own daughter talking about her, as if it were an object? So wait, because what I heard, no mother should listen. That afternoon, I was folding laundry in my room when the cell phone beeped. It was an audio notification on WhatsApp. I saw the name, Grace. At the time, I thought it was some message, maybe asking to buy something at the market, or warning that it would arrive later. I sat on the edge of the bed, with the tea towel still on my lap, and played it. In the first second, I already knew that it wasn't for me. Her voice came hurriedly, coldly, without any care. Rich. I can't stand her here anymore. I breathe the same air and it feels like I'm getting sick. I've seen a home in Concord, $800 a month, and Carol said she can transfer the deed by the end of the month. It's going to be better for everyone. Silence. My heart stopped there. But the recording continued. We just need to scare her. No big deal. Show that she no longer has control. She doesn't even realize that we've already started. And the insurance, well, it's in our name. Nobody can take that away. I stood there, motionless. The cloth slipped from my lap. My daughter's voice, the one I generated inside me, sounded like a stranger's. He spoke of me as if he were talking about an old piece of furniture, a problem to be pushed away. He called me a nuisance. He planned to get me out of my house. He laughed as he spoke. At that moment, the ground disappeared from under my feet, but I didn't cry. Not at that moment. I stood there, listening to the echo of those words hitting the walls of my chest. I pressed play again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each repetition hurt more. She doesn't even realize what we've already started. Well, now I realized. I got up slowly, went to the bathroom and washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I no longer recognized the woman who was looking back at me. It was not sadness. It was a kind of mourning. The grace I created had died there, and in her place, there was someone capable of burying me alive for convenience. I went back to the room, sat at the table, and took my notebook. I wrote down everything I heard, word for word, time, date, tone of voice, everything. It was as if my body had gone into a silent survival mode. No shouting, no scandal, only lucidity. I knew that from then on, I would not sleep the same way, nor look at her with the same eyes. And that's when a new thought began to be born. Slow but steady. I needed to react, not out of revenge, but out of respect, for the woman I was all my life, for her mother who never denied anything, for the person who was still alive inside, even surrounded by people who just waited for me to give in. But how do you get up after hearing that? How do you look into the eyes of those who plan to erase you from their own history? How do you face the blood of your own blood without tearing yourself apart from within? These answers were still not clear to me. But one thing I already knew. I wasn't going to leave that house, and whoever wanted to get me out of there would have to face something they never saw in me, because what is born of a wounded silence, it has a strength that no one expects. But was I prepared for what would come next? Listening was just the beginning, the hardest part. It was yet to happen. That night seemed to have no end. I walked through the house like a shadow, barefoot, without making a sound, as if the steps could awaken a pain greater than the one I was already feeling. The audio was still on my phone. I played low, but inside me he screamed. I sat on the cold kitchen floor, right there where I'd so often prepared her favorite dinner, roast chicken with sweet potatoes, and that farofa she said was magical. On that floor, with the phone in my hand, I pressed play again. The same voice, the same sentence, the same poison. I can't stand her here anymore. Home and conquered. Insurance is in our name. My God, how does a daughter say that about her own mother? I found myself remembering everything. Every birthday I prepared with a theme, even when we only had 2 balloons and a simple cake. Every new shoe I never bought for myself so that she could have a better one. Every night I spent sewing her graduation costume because I couldn't afford a ready-made one. Everything. Everything came like a movie. The first fever, the first mommy, the notes she left on my pillow. I wondered, at what turn of life did I lose my daughter? Was it when I started to age? When did she start to see me as a burden, no longer as a port? It hurts, you know. It hurts in a way that there is no remedy. There is no tea. There is no prayer that you can take away at once. But there, between one memory and another, between one sob and another, something inside me began to change. It was as if an old voice, the kind that only very experienced women have, said, "Get up. You're not trash. You are root." And it was sitting on that icy floor that I promised myself that I wouldn't let myself be pushed into the corner of the story I built, because there is something that few people understand. A real mother is not just love. It is a living memory. And when they mess with it, it is not revenge that is born. It is justice. I got up slowly, washed my face in the kitchen sink, and looked at myself in the reflection of the window. I was older, yes. The wrinkles, the thinning hair, the tired shoulders. But behind it all, it was still me, the same one who overcame widowhood, who raised a daughter alone, who went through winters without a heater, and yet never stopped putting flowers on the table. At that time, I realized they thought I was weak because I was quiet, that I was stupid because I was generous, that I was disposable because I had already given everything. But they forgot one thing. Those who have lost everything once are no longer afraid of losing again, and those who have lived long enough learn to react over time. This story still has a lot to happen, and I ask you, stay with me until the end, because there is a part that will still happen, that to this day makes me tremble just remembering it. I went back to my room, but I couldn't lie down. I sat in the armchair, the one near the window, where I used to watch the sunset. I grabbed my notebook and wrote, March 14th, 10:47 p.m. I heard my daughter plan to leave her house. It was just the beginning. That same night, I separated a new folder, hidden inside the closet where I keep the crochet quilts. There, I began to gather evidence, a screenshot of the message, the recording saved on another device, a copy of my most important documents. I didn't know how I was going to use it yet, or when, but I knew I would. And what I didn't imagine, it's just that the poison of that audio was going to spread even deeper, because the next day, their behavior changed, and when the snake realizes that you've seen the boat, she starts pretending to be a flower, but I had already learned the difference. And what happened after that? No one in the family ever imagined it. What about you? Have you ever heard your own daughter plan your outing as if you were an old piece of furniture? Well, prepare your heart, because their mask was still going to fall, and in a way that even they didn't expect. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't have breakfast. I didn't pray. I didn't make my bed. I put on my blue linen skirt, tied my hair in a simple bun, and left with the briefcase hidden under my arm. I went straight to First Carolina Bank, the same one where I have had an account for more than 20 years. When the service lady called me, she looked at me with a smile and asked how she could help. I took a deep breath, looked her right in the eye, and said, I need to change all my passwords. Now. She hesitated for a second, perhaps surprised by the firm tone of my voice, but soon began the procedure. I changed the password of the account, the savings, the card. I have canceled any access linked to third parties. Then I transferred my savings, the little I had, but it was my sweat, to a new account at a different branch. I asked for confidentiality. The manager, who knew my story, looked carefully and asked, Are you okay? I smiled, the way we smile when we don't want to open our souls. It will stay. I left there lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time in a long time, I was acting. I went straight to the house of Mrs. Beatrice, a friend from church. She referred me to a lawyer, a Mr. Harrison Ford. Yes, just like the actor. A man with gray hair, a steady gaze, and a room full of books. I entered with my briefcase on my lap and waited for him to call me. When I sat down before him, my hands were still shaking, but my voice, no, I told him everything. The arrival of Grace and Richard, the changes in the house, the silent looks, the strange visits, the invasive questions, and finally, the audio. I handed over the cell phone with the recording already separated. Ready. He put on headphones, listened to everything without saying a word. When he finished, he took off his headphones slowly, folded his hands on the table, and said, This recording is worth gold. And you, Phyllis, she is much more lucid than they imagine. That moved me. Because inside, I was still just a wounded mother. But in that man's eyes, I was a woman protecting his right to exist. He explained to me that audio could serve as evidence in a property and psychological protection action, that I had the legal right to keep my home, my dignity, my peace. He guided me to document everything, dates, behaviors, loose phrases, and he said, You are not going to make noise now. It will be silent, because silence sometimes screams louder. I left the office with a mixture of sadness and strength. Sadness because no mother should need a lawyer to protect herself from her own daughter, but strength because I had chosen not to be destroyed. And sometimes, it's that silent choice that changes everything. You know, there's a moment in life when we realize that we don't need to scream to be heard, that it is enough to say no, calmly, that it is enough to close a door without knocking, that it is enough to get up and not to return. And if you've ever been through something like this, if you've ever had to gather the courage to protect yourself from those who should protect you, tell me here in the comments with I understand you, or I know how it is. We recognize ourselves in this pain, even in silence. But what I didn't know yet, when I left that office, it's just that they were also moving. And what would Grace do next? It would take me by surprise in a way that not even justice could prevent, because there are people who, when they realize that they have lost control, show their true face. and hers was yet to appear. When I returned home that afternoon, the air felt heavier than ever. The door creaked as if to announce that I was no longer welcome inside, and for a moment, I took a deep breath before entering. Grace was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables as if she were the owner of the house. Richard, sitting on my couch, watched television with his legs spread, too comfortable in a place that wasn't his. I closed the door slowly, and they looked at me the way you look at a visitor who arrived too soon. I forced a smile. I learned early on that when the enemy thinks you're unarmed, he lets his guard down. I prepared dinner as usual. Chicken in the oven, loose rice, fresh salad. As I stirred the pots, I heard Grace saying in a rehearsed, almost exaggerated tone, "Mom, I've scheduled your routine doctor's appointment for next week, okay? Don't worry, we'll take you." I just turned my face to her with the most artificial calm I've ever put on my body. Smile. "That's good, my daughter. We see that." Richard, from the corner, let out a muffled giggle, one of those that only those who keep evil recognize. Inside, the chicken almost fell out of my hand. The consultation. That's exactly what the audio said. The so-called consultation, which was actually the gateway to take me to a home in Concord. A trap disguised as caution. But instead of reacting, I swallowed. I served the dishes. I sat at the table. I ate every bite as if I were chewing on stones. I had nausea, trembling, fear, but none of them saw it. My mother always said that silence is the last dignity of a woman surrounded by dangerous people. And that night, I found out what she meant. As soon as I finished cleaning the kitchen, I went to my room, closed the door slowly, and took out the folder I had started to assemble from the back of the closet. I opened it slowly, as if opening a wound. Inside were the audio, the prints, the notes, the names, the dates, everything organized, everything ready for the right time. The lawyer had told me, "Don't confront, wait," and I waited. That same night, when they fell asleep, I installed 2 hidden cameras. One in the living room, inside the shelf where an old vase was, another in the kitchen, camouflaged behind the jars of groceries. My hands trembled, but my spirit was steady. I knew they revealed themselves when they thought they were alone, and I had to record everything, every sentence, every shot, every attempt to paint myself as incapable. The following days were a slow torture. Grace was talking loudly on the phone, describing my confusions. She said that I mixed dates, that I had become aggressive. Me, aggressive. I, who never knocked on the door. While she made up these stories, I folded towels, washed dishes, watered plants, all in silence, everything listening, absorbing everything. Richard, in turn, began to lock doors, hide papers, complain about my presence in every corner. Once I got close to the stairs and heard him saying, "She's falling into the conversation properly." I stood there, in the middle of the corridor, with my heart beating in my neck. But I kept walking, pretending it wasn't me. My weapons were now different. The worst moment of this phase was when I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman reflected there. Sunken eyes, trembling mouth, tired face. It gave me such a deep sadness that I had to sit on the edge of the bed. I thought, how did my life turn this around? But then, I took a deep breath, because even though it was broken, I knew I still had one last thread of strength, and it was this thread that was going to guide me. Silence became my protection, my strategy, my discipline, and at the same time, the rope with which they would hang themselves. And it was just when I thought I had seen it all, that I heard the phrase that made me understand that the danger was far beyond what I imagined, the phrase that made me freeze from head to toe. And it is this phrase that I will tell you in the next part. Are you prepared to hear what my own daughter has said about me? Because it took me a while to believe it myself. I spent the whole week as someone walking on glass, each calculated step, each heavy breath, but without letting any of them notice. The house was still the same on the outside, the wall clock marking the slow pace of the morning, the smell of the coffee I was brewing, the paintings I hung myself so many years ago, but inside, everything had changed. I watched Grace and Richard with a look they didn't recognize, a look that learned to see beyond the gesture, beyond the word, beyond the fake smile. They spoke quietly, exchanged messages, hid papers, and I pretended not to notice. I learned that sometimes to survive, we have to let the enemy believe that we are still winning. On Sunday, I went to church. I sat on the same bench where I sat so many times when George died, when Grace was born, when life seemed too big for me. The pastor, a simple man, looked at me with that way of someone who sees pain, without it needing to be said. When he approached, I couldn't stand it. I didn't cry. I didn't tell everything. I didn't break down. He just said, "Pray for me. It's going to hurt, but it will be right." He held my hands and nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly the weight of the sentence. I came home different. It was no longer just the injured mother. I had become the woman who takes her own story back. I opened my briefcase and began to organize everything meticulously. The house certificate, the receipts of the loans I made for her expenses, my identification, the bank statements that showed the improper withdrawals, the recordings of the conversations, every little piece of evidence that showed that the daughter I raised had chosen to cruelly move away from me, not out of necessity. It was like putting together a puzzle of my own salvation. I called Mr. Harrison Ford's office and set up a new meeting. This time, I entered his room with a different posture. He noticed. "You are firmer, Phyllis," he said. And I said, "I've found that when someone tries to put you out, you learn to turn on your own light." We talked for almost 2 hours. He explained the documents I needed to sign to reverse the deed to the house, the same deed that I, in a moment of trust and fragility, had temporarily transferred to Grace's name when I faced my health issues a few years earlier. They will try to argue incapacity, emotional manipulation, but with what you have here, we managed to tear everything down. We gathered bank records, medical histories, church testimonies, proof that I had always been totally independent. He asked me to remain in absolute silence inside the house. Silence is your advantage. Let them talk to each other. Leave traces. People who conspire believe they are smarter than they really are. I agreed, and for the first time, I felt that I was not alone. When I got home that afternoon, I looked at the front door with another meaning. It wasn't just wood. It was my territory, my story, my whole life in there. And if they thought they were going to get me out of there like someone who changes an old piece of furniture, they would discover that there is strength in those who have lost everything once, and there is dignity in the woman who has learned to face storms without making a storm. I approached the window and saw my reflection. There was fatigue, yes, but there was something new too. A firmness that I did not remember having since the day I became a widow. And that's why I say, if this piece of my life can be a mirror or a hug for someone who is listening, help me to carry it forward. Like this video, subscribe here to the channel. This makes a lot more difference than you might think, because telling this story hurts, but sharing it with those who understand, healing. That night, Grace called me from the room in that voice too sweet to be true. He asked if I was okay, if I needed anything. I just replied, "I'm great, honey." And for the first time, it wasn't me who trembled. It was her, because something in my eyes gave away that I knew more than I appeared. And when the predator senses that the prey has woken up, he changes the pace. And what she did next, trying to regain control, was so unexpected, so calculated, that to this day I shiver to remember. And that's what I need to tell you in the next part, because there, in that gesture of hers, I understood how far a daughter can go when she decides that her own mother is an obstacle. Want to hear what happened? When Mr. Ford and I started to collect all the documentation, I still thought, deep in my chest, that maybe all this was just a recent plan, the result of their desperation. But it was there that I discovered the truth that destroyed me in a different way. They hadn't started now. They had been erasing me little by little for a long time, and each piece of paper that the lawyer placed on the table seemed to have the weight of a wet stone. First, he opened a manila envelope and pushed it towards me. "Phyllis, have you authorized any refinancing in the last 2 years?" My heart almost came out of my mouth. I didn't even know how a refinancing worked. He then showed me 2 requests. 2, made in the name of my house, both denied by the bank due to inconsistency of documents. On each one there, my forged signature. I recognized it immediately. The P was too rounded. I've never made my P like this. The rest of my name looked like a hasty imitation, a hand trying to impersonate mine. When I saw that, I felt such a deep pain in my soul that I had to rest my hand on the table. My daughter, my girl. I was already trying to take my house even before he came to live with me. And I was there, thinking it was just a crisis, just a difficult period, just a lack of time. But it didn't stop there. The following week, Mr. Ford called me into the office. When I arrived, he had a serious, almost heavy face. "Phyllis, do you know what this is?" he asked, placing a long form with the letterhead of a nursing home in Concord. Maple Gardens Assisted Living, the same name I had heard in the audio, the same place that cost $800 a month. And right there, at the top of the document, admission reserved, Phyllis M. Sawyer. My skin froze. The signature, again, false. The email address used was phyllis.sawyer.healthcareoutlook, which I had never seen in my life. And that email, he said, is in the name of your daughter's husband. I felt as if the ground was shaking. The vacancy was already reserved. They just needed to get me there. Is that it? This was what they called a routine consultation. All that was left was to surrender. When Mr. Ford turned the next page, he revealed something even more cruel. There was a medical report attached, stating that I exhibited significant cognitive decline, occasional aggression, and inability to manage financial decisions. Signed by a doctor I had never heard of. I laughed. I laughed nervously. I laughed out of hatred. I laughed in disbelief. Me? Aggressive? I, who even when I fought with George, and there were few times, never raised my voice. Mr. Ford looked at me with affection, as if holding the hand of someone who is watching his own life being dismantled. This here is forgery. Very clear. And for the first time, the word crime was said out loud. Crime committed by my own daughter. In the middle of all this, I leaned back in my chair, looked at the ceiling of that office full of books and blurted out, almost in a whisper, they were killing me in life, for a wooden house and insurance. Because that was it. The raw, naked, and undisguised truth. They wanted my assets in life, and they seemed to be in no hurry for the rest. It is hard to admit, but there are children who see their parents as a burden, as a check, as a shortcut. And if there's a phrase I need to tell you now, from the bottom of my soul, it's this: stay with me, because the most memorable moment in this story is yet to come, and to this day I get goosebumps remembering it. Each new discovery was a blow, but it was also a test. And the more evidence I had, the stronger I became, because a mother can be naive out of love, but when she opens her eyes, no one closes again. It was when I closed the briefcase that Mr. Ford handed me and got up to leave that he grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "Phyllis, get ready. When they realize that the plan is falling apart, they're going to try something even worse." And he was right, because what did Grace do next? It wasn't just cruel, it was unthinkable. And that's what I'm going to tell you in the next part. Do you really want to know how far my daughter has come? That afternoon, I called Mrs. Lucille's grandson, an old friend from church. A calm, respectful boy, one of those who still take off their shoes before entering other people's houses. I explained the situation, without giving too many details, just what was necessary. He didn't ask questions, just said, "Mrs. Phyllis, you deserve to be safe." In less than an hour, he installed 3 small, discreet cameras that fit in the palm of his hand. One remained on the living room shelf, camouflaged between 2 old picture frames. Another, behind a curtain in the kitchen. And the third, in the hallway, inside a little wooden box that I had painted myself years ago. When he left, the house looked the same, but I wasn't. For the first time in a long time, I had eyes where there had been helplessness before, and so it was that, in the following days, the truth began to appear on its own, without my having to move a word. In the first recording, Grace was on the phone, walking around the room as if she owned everything. "She doesn't even suspect that she will leave here straight home," he said. The way she pronounced home cut me off. He was not careful. It was contempt. "We just need to push this medical appointment, and that's it." On the other end, Richard's voice replied, "The sooner, the more profit. Profit." They talked about me as if talking about an investment giving work. I pressed the pause with a shaking hand. I went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed and cried softly without sound. Then I wiped my face, took a deep breath and copied each word on a piece of paper to attach to the test folder. A few days later, another recording showed Grace opening my document drawer, taking pictures, rearranging everything and saying, "If we can get this by the end of the month, we don't have to worry about anything anymore." And Richard, she doesn't even realize how fragile she is. It's now. There I felt something that I can't even explain. It wasn't pure anger. It wasn't just pain. It was a mixture of grief and lucidity. And it was at that time that I spoke to God. Not in common prayer, but looking at the camera that I had turned on in my room. I pressed the button and began. If one day I can no longer speak, these words will say who I am. I recorded everything, every sensation, every doubt, every memory of what I lived with my daughter. It was like talking to myself and at the same time, to something bigger than myself. And you know, there is a type of memory that never dies. We can age, the skin can sag, but certain memories are so vivid that they seem to breathe inside us. I paused the recording, closed my eyes, and thought about it. And now I ask you, do you also have a memory like that? The ones that score, that squeeze, that don't come out? If so, share it with me in the comments. Sometimes, sharing a memory is the most beautiful way to heal what she has left. In the following days, I took all the recordings to Mr. Ford. He listened to each passage in absolute silence, without interrupting. When he finished, he took a deep breath and said, "Phyllis, this here, it is proof of intent, and intention, in the eyes of the law, speaks loudly." I left the office with a heavy briefcase in my arms, but a firm heart. It was as if, for the first time, that house they wanted to snatch from me, was defending me. Every wall, every wood, every object seemed to finally reveal what he had seen. I was no longer alone, and it was just when I thought I had seen it all, that one of the cameras captured something that took my breath away. Something so unexpected, so cruel, that to this day I remember the moment I saw it, and my whole body shivered. Want to know what it was? Because after that moment, history changed direction forever. I woke up before them that morning. The sky was still pink behind the trees, and the whole house seemed suspended in a silence I had never heard inside. I brewed the coffee as I did every day. Hot water, paper filter, the smell rising slowly. But this time my hands were steady. They no longer trembled. I knew what I was going to do, not out of revenge, but because there has come a point where dignity speaks louder than fear. I sat at the table with my cup, waiting. When I heard their footsteps in the hallway, my heart pounded. But he did not waver. They entered the kitchen with that intimacy that they were not entitled to. Grace went straight to the fridge. Richard passed me without looking, and that's when I decided to start. "Grace," I called, my voice calm, almost emotionless. She turned her face slowly, as if strange to be called by her own mother. "Sit down." She frowned, but sat down. Richard, curious, settled down too. I put my cup on the table, folded my hands, and said, "I've received an audio." Their expressions changed at the time. They froze, that freeze that only those who are guilty know. "But it wasn't by chance," I continued. "It was God." Grace tried to laugh, but the sound came out weak, dry. "Mom, what audio? What are you talking about?" Richard, more nervous, shook his leg. I didn't answer. I took the cell phone calmly, put it on the table, pressed play, and touched my hands. The silence that followed was so deep that I could hear the clock on the wall ticking the seconds. My daughter's voice filled the kitchen. Cold, cruel, sharp. "I can't stand her here anymore. The home in Concord already has a vacancy. Carol said she can get the deed. The sooner, the more profit." Richard widened his eyes. Grace turned white as flour. No one breathed. When the audio ended, no one had the courage to touch their cell phones. Richard tried to speak first, stumbling over the words. "Phyllis, that was a misunderstanding. I raised my hand, asking for silence, and they obeyed. I got up slowly, put the chair in place as I always did, and said, 'Now you're going to get out of my house, and of my life.'" Richard was flabbergasted. Grace opened her mouth, but nothing came out. They expected tears, screams, hysteria, but I just turned around. I walked to the kitchen door and stopped for a moment. "Don't touch my coffee, and don't talk to me until you've finished packing." I left the room, leaving the audio still echoing. For the first time in a long time, my steps were lightness, not weight. And as I climbed the stairs, I heard the muffled sound of the two arguing with each other, desperate, stumbling, realizing that they had lost. But little did they know that it was not yet the fall. It was just the beginning. Because what happened when they tried to react, it was much worse. Want to know what they did to try to reverse the situation? Because there, they showed what they were really capable of. I didn't go down that morning. I stayed in the room, sat in the armchair by the window, and let the silence do the work my voice didn't need to do. Downstairs, I heard slamming doors, hurried footsteps, nervous whispers. They were desperate, and for the first time, it wasn't me. It was with the consequences. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Ford's office. My voice came out firm. "It's time," and he understood. Within hours, the petition for a provisional restraining order was already filed. Attempted financial exploitation, psychological abuse, falsification of documents. He explained to me that, with the recordings and the history, The judge would have no doubts. And there wasn't. The next morning, I received an official notification. Grace and Richard had 48 hours to leave my home, and they could not approach me within a radius of 300 meters. I read that paper with my hands resting on the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I just felt a huge weight coming out of my chest, as if someone had unlocked an inner door that I didn't even know was closed. The police arrived shortly after, 2 polite, respectful officers who had seen too much in this kind of case. They asked me to stay upstairs while they accompanied the 2 downstairs. I heard Grace's voice break down in tears. Mom, please let me explain. This is a misunderstanding, I swear." But I didn't move. I stayed where I was, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at my hands. A mother always recognizes when crying is not regret. It is despair at losing control. Richard shouted, cursed, said he was going to reverse everything, that he knew his rights. But the officers were firm. "You have 5 minutes to put the essentials in your suitcase." When I heard footsteps climbing the stairs, I stood up. He was one of the policemen. "Mrs. Phyllis, do you want to say something to them?" For a moment, the world was silent, and I knew that this was the last chance to choose what kind of woman I would be. I descended slowly, my feet recognizing each step that had sustained my entire life. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw the 2 of them standing in the room, holding awkward bags, their faces marked by something that was not pain. It was defeat. I had nothing to say, nothing they deserved to hear. I walked to a small closet, opened it slowly, took out a wooden box where I kept old photos. The first ones I took from Grace as a baby, wrapped in a little pink blanket. The photos of the garden of the house in Asheville, of our simple Christmases, of the walks in the park when she still held my hand. I put the box in her hands. She trembled. "What's that, Mom?" I looked into the eyes of that woman who was once my girl and replied, "This is all you gave me back. Nothing more. No speech, no anger, no tears, only the truth." She began to cry, to babble apologies, to say that she loved me. But love is not speech, it's attitude, and hers had already been said long before that day. I turned and climbed the ladder as the cops led them out. When I heard the door slam, I felt as if the sound echoed through all the years I spent believing that if I gave a little more, maybe she would go back to being that child who said, "Mommy, don't let go of my hand." But then I understood. There are hands that we let go of not because we want to, but because she finally learned to hold on to herself. The deed was reversed 3 days later. My home is mine again. My life, it fit my name again. But just when I thought everything was already resolved, the phone rang with news that I could never have imagined. And what came next? It was the final blow. A revelation that not even the lawyer expected. Want to know what happened? Because it is now that the whole truth comes out. In the days following their departure, the house was so quiet that even the sound of the clock seemed louder. But it was a different silence from the one that hurt me before. It was a clean house silence, not of dust, but of energy. Really, of soul. But outside, the storm was beginning. On the first day, Grace appeared in front of my fence talking to her neighbor, Mrs. Mitchell, trying to paint the story as if I had had a sudden outbreak. I saw from the window her gesticulating, saying that I was confused, that I needed help. The neighbor only shook her head, uncomfortable. I kept looking at it without blinking, not out of anger, but out of sadness, because there was my daughter trying to bury me alive a second time. The next day, I received a notification that Grace had filed a lawsuit alleging that I was mentally unstable. Her lawyer stated that I was making impulsive decisions, and that I did not have the capacity to manage my assets. It was almost ironic. I, who had spent my whole life balancing every penny, raising her with a cleaning salary, taking care of the house alone, was now incapable, because I didn't want to give up my life on a platter. Mr. Ford called me to do new cognitive and psychological exams. I did them all, full battery, tests of memory, reasoning, attention. I passed everything. The doctor, a serious gentleman with round glasses, said, "You are lucid like few people your age." These reports were attached to the process, and the attempt to put my sanity in doubt fell apart in less than a week. When this happened, their mask began to crack for good. The investigation into the forged documents has advanced. The bank confirmed that the signatures were not mine. The home in Concord confirmed that the email used was fraudulent. Carol, a member of the county clerk, confessed that Richard had asked for guidance on transfer of deed to managerial care. That's when their world began to fall apart. The factory where Richard worked, in Gastonia, received an anonymous tip with excerpts from the recordings. I wasn't the one who sent it, but I know exactly who it was. The company opened an internal investigation. Within 3 days, he was fired for inappropriate conduct and breach of trust. Richard's family, who always treated me with cordiality, distanced themselves from him, disappeared, and the friends, those who laughed with them in restaurants, at parties, at barbecues, have also disappeared. It is curious how those who participate in cruelty do not like to see the mirror of truth up close. Grace, groundless, began to send me short messages. Mom, I made a mistake. Then, I was confused. Then, I was someone else back then, at that time. Funny how people try to separate the version that made the mistake from the version that wants forgiveness, as if they were two different women. But there is only one, and I knew both of them. She even tried to ask some neighbors for help, saying that she didn't know how she had gotten to this point. But the truth, it's just that he arrived because he wanted to, because he chose, because he believed I was disposable. And when someone sees the mother like this, the fall is inevitable and lonely. There was a day when she came to the door, not to scream, not to justify herself, but to try to ring the bell crying. I stayed inside, holding my breath. I didn't open it, not out of revenge, but because I learned that some doors, when they open again, only serve to hurt more, and I had been hurt enough. I watched through the curtain it collapse on the step, holding that wooden box with the photos I returned. A mother always feels when the pain of the other is true, but he also knows when that pain was only born because the plan failed. And let me tell you something from the bottom of my soul. There are stories in life that hurt so much, that we keep silent, and yet they continue to weigh. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So, if my voice is reaching your ear, help me to take this story forward. Like this video, subscribe, and let's make this truth reach those who need to hear that they are not alone. The days went by, and the dust settled, but I hadn't seen their last move yet. Because when pride mixes with despair, people do unimaginable things. And what did Grace and Richard try to do after that? It almost took my breath away. Do you want to know how far they went? Because now the truth gets uglier and more revealing. The day of the audience arrived as the inevitable things of life do, slow on the outside, tumultuous on the inside. I woke up early, put on my navy blue dress, the same one I wore to Grace's graduation, and tied my bun carefully. I wanted to enter that courtroom in one piece, not out of pride, but because I hadn't seen myself like this for a long time. Firm, conscious, master of myself. When I arrived, the room was still being prepared. White light, rigid seats, too strong air conditioning. I sat down in the second row, put my briefcase on my lap, and closed my eyes for a moment, asking God to give me no victory, but courage. Courage not to tremble, courage not to cry, courage to tell the truth without fear. Grace and Richard arrived a few minutes later. She walked in hunched, her shoulders high, her face swollen from crying. He entered haughty, trying to look confident, but the step betrayed nervousness. They avoided looking at me, and I didn't force it either. Sometimes silence is heavier than any words. The judge entered. Everyone stood up, and I felt as if the air was changing weight. The process began. Mr. Ford presented the first proofs, the denied refinance applications, the forged signatures, the conquered home forms made in my name, the false reports on my sanity. Every document he placed on the table seemed to be a stone taken from my chest and placed on theirs. I saw their reactions without having to look directly. Grace shrank more with each page. Richard blushed, restless, moving his leg as he always did when cornered. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the moment when the judge asked to hear the recording. The room was so quiet that you could hear the click of the button when Mr. Ford pressed play. My daughter's voice echoed through those white walls with the same coldness that had crossed my soul months before. I can't stand her here anymore. The home in Concord already has a vacancy. Carol said she can get the deed. The sooner, the more profit. When the audio ended, the judge slowly took off his glasses, looked directly at Grace and said, "Is that a daughter talking about her mother?" That cut the air. Richard tried to justify it, saying that it was a misinterpreted outburst, a private conversation with no real intention, but there was no way out. The judge asked for silence, raised his hand, and declared that what he heard there constituted psychological abuse, attempted exploitation, and fraud. The words entered the room like hammers. At a certain point, while I was watching that scene, something inside me moved, but it was not revenge. It was a kind of profound, painful, but necessary liberation. And that's when I thought something I need to say to you now. Sometimes, life waits for us to hit rock bottom to show that there is ground, a firm ground, which has always been there, just waiting for us to get up. When the judge announced that Grace and Richard would lose any rights to my house, that they would pay a fine, and that they would be prosecuted for forgery, I did not celebrate. I didn't feel a victory. I felt heavy, an old familiar weight sticking off my shoulders as if someone had untied a rope. Grace began to cry loudly, a cry that didn't feel like regret. It felt like desperation. Richard lowered his head, but I didn't look at them, not out of coldness, but out of respect for myself. At the end, the judge asked me if I wanted to make any statements. I stood up, my legs firm as they hadn't been in years. I took a letter out of my pocket and handed it to him. I don't want revenge. I just want to live in peace. The judge read it quietly, folded the paper carefully, and nodded. I left the room slowly, with small steps, but with a big soul. Great for calm, great for truth, great for survival. I didn't look back, because some stories we only end when we learn that looking forward is what saves us. But when I thought that hearing had been the end, the outcome, the closure, I received news that would change everything once again. Something that came from where I least expected it. And that's what I'm going to tell you in the next part, because life sometimes still holds one last knot before rest. Want to know what happened? When it was all over in court and the dust finally settled, I went back to my house as if returning to the body after a very long fever. I remember to this day the feeling of opening the door and feeling the air still, clean, without strange footsteps, without voices whispering in the corners. Just silence, a true silence, one of those that does not hurt, that welcomes. I sat on the couch and stood there, quietly, staring at the walls that had previously seemed full of menace, and that day seemed full of possibility. The first thing I did after taking a deep breath was to go to the backyard. My garden was sad, suffering, almost as bruised as I had been a few months before. The hard earth, some burnt leaves, and those vases that Grace kept saying were old ladies' stuff. I knelt there, put my hand in the dirt, and started to pull out everything that was dead. It was funny. As I pulled out rotten roots, I felt like I was pulling out a remnant of shadow from inside me. I spent the whole morning there, and when I was done, I planted my sunflowers. I like them. They always look for the light, even after very dark nights. And on that day, I was also trying to do the same thing. The weeks went by, and I filled my house in a different way. I went back to church more consistently. It wasn't an escape, it was a reunion. Pastor Williams greeted me with that wide smile and said, "Phyllis, you're back different." And I smiled back, because it was true. I no longer carried the guilt that was not mine. I no longer trembled when I heard footsteps behind me, and I no longer expected to receive love from where it would no longer come. From time to time, a neighbor would knock on my door bringing cake, asking how I was. Women who had previously only waved from afar now sat in my kitchen to listen to the whole story. I always told calmly, without exaggeration, without hatred, only the truth. And, incredible as it may seem, almost all of them said some variation of, "Phyllis, this happened to an aunt of mine," or, "I went through something similar," and that's when I realized I wasn't the only one. I never was. In one of these conversations, my friend Rose's daughter suggested that I record short videos telling my experiences, my reflections. "You speak beautifully, Phyllis. He speaks truthfully. This can help a lot of people." I laughed at the time, thinking it was exaggerated, but the idea was planted in my mind like a seed. A few days later, I sat on the porch with my phone, pressed the record button, and spoke. I talked for 5 minutes about late choices, about love that hurts, and about how we need to learn that being a mother doesn't mean accepting everything. When I published it, I didn't think anyone would watch it, but the next day there was already a comment from a woman from Virginia, Texas, Alabama. One wrote, "This story is just like mine." Another said, "Thank you for saying what I never got." And that touched me in a deep way. I realized that my pain had become a bridge, and a bridge is good for crossing. Over time, I recorded more. Little stories, little advice, little memories, and people were arriving. I, who used to feel so alone, now had company until dawn in the comments. Strong, broken, lived women, each with their own baggage, and all understanding mine. But there is something important I need to say. I never looked for Grace anymore. I never sent a message. I never asked how she was. A lot of people think this is cold, but for me it's not. Forgiveness exists, yes. I forgave my daughter. I forgave because I don't want to carry hatred in my chest, because hatred ages the soul faster than time ages the body. But coexistence is something else. Living together is a choice, and I chose peace. And it was only after I chose this peace that things inside me began to truly blossom. My house became light. My heart, too. Every sunflower in the yard seemed to remind me that I still had the right, and the obligation, to keep living my way. But even with all this tranquility that I finally found, something happened one afternoon that made my heart stop for a second. Something left on my doorstep. Something I didn't expect. Something that, in a way, it called me back to a part of my story that I thought I had already buried. And that's exactly what I'm going to tell you about in the next part. Because life, my dear, he never closes a door without first letting a crack of light through. When the door closed behind Grace and Richard that day, and the police escorted them out of my house, I felt a strange, and at the same time familiar sensation. The air felt different, as if I had lifted an immense weight from my chest. But it was also empty air. Not a bad emptiness, but an emptiness of an end of cycle, end of a story that I myself helped to write, but that could no longer continue. I knew that my path was now different, but I didn't know yet how different this new journey would be from everything I had ever lived. Over the next few days, I returned to my garden, the same garden that Grace said was old lady's stuff. I looked at him with different eyes now. Each root uprooted, each new flower planted, seemed a symbol of how life can start again, and how often it is necessary to wait for things to happen in their own time, and how, in this time, it is necessary to learn to look inside oneself, more than to what is around one. I remember very well the first time I held my daughter in my arms. I saw her as my everything, as my reason, my future. Like all mothers love, I placed all my hopes in that little being, like a fragile and beautiful vessel that would be the best part of me. But I never imagined that that baby, to whom I dedicated my youth, my dreams, and my soul, would one day look at me as a problem, like a burden, like an obstacle. I just wanted to give her everything I didn't have, and in the end, I did. But the price was high, and the lesson bitter. I look at everything I've experienced, and I see so many women like me, women who have been silenced, erased, used, forgotten, women who, like me, put their children before everything else, their families before themselves, and who ended up getting lost along the way. But one thing I learned, and maybe that's what brought me here, there's strength in waiting. Life has its own way of showing that not everything can be rushed, that God's justice doesn't come with shouts, as I've imagined so many times. It comes with time. In time, the truth comes out. Over time, the wounds heal. Over time, the strength grows. I still love my daughter. Yes, even after everything. No. It's not a love that makes me blind or keeps me waiting for something that won't happen. It is a mature love, a love that, contrary to what they think, does not demand anything in return, but it is a love that has also understood the limit. Forgiveness exists within me, but the coexistence, that's a choice. And today, I choose peace. I have learned, through pain and time, to love myself more than anything else. I, who have spent my whole life sacrificing myself, now understand that the greatest sacrifice I can make for myself is to respect my limits. My life today is lighter because, finally, I chose to be true to myself. I chose not to be the mother who annuls herself, the woman who loses herself. Today, I am the woman who has found her own voice, and that voice says that I am not a burden. I am a woman of dignity, and for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. You know, peace doesn't come easy when you have to rebuild so much of what's been broken. But peace comes when you forgive yourself, when you understand that there is nothing more to do for those who don't want to see your effort. Peace comes when you stop expecting love from others and start giving yourself the love you've always deserved. I feel stronger now, more certain than I am. It doesn't matter what the world says. I know that, in the end, what remains is our ability to choose what to do with the pain they have imposed on us. It's not about revenge. It's not about retaliation. It's about being able to look back and see that, despite everything, you managed to come out intact. It wasn't easy. But oh, how it was worth it. The pain of betrayal has been replaced by the wisdom of time. And now, I can walk towards a future that depends only on me. And that's why, when I think about everything that happened, I can only ask one question. And now, what will come to me? What else has life in store? Knowing that my story, as painful as it was, has turned into something I can carry with dignity. I went down. I went to the ceiling. I was a shelter. And for a while, I let myself be a carpet. But now, I am silence and freedom. The pain I experienced, the betrayals I endured, the sharp words that cut my heart, all of this was hard to swallow, and it took me time to rebuild myself. But today, looking at my garden, at the sunflowers I planted with my own hands, at the house I regained back, at the peace I finally feel in my chest, I can say that I have won. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with something stronger, dignity. I was betrayed by the person I loved the most, by the daughter I raised with so much effort, and yet here I am, with my head held high. As they say, time is the greatest of judges, and it was he who brought me this justice that I had been waiting for. It wasn't easy, but I learned that in the end, everything worthwhile in life requires patience, courage, and above all, love for yourself. Now, living with others, whether with those who loved me or hurt me, is a choice, and I choose peace. What happened to me, perhaps, is something that many of you can relate to. Life is made up of encounters and disagreements, of struggles that seem endless, but that, in the end, teach us the true meaning of being strong. And I now know that this strength came from within, from a place where before there was only pain. I learned that when we are disrespected, our dignity is never something that should be given in exchange for anything. It is our own strength. It's not about getting revenge. It's not about making others suffer. It's about standing your ground and showing those who try to bring us down that nothing can make us fall again. And I know that many of you, or even some of you, may have already gone through something similar. Perhaps you have been hurt by those you trusted the most, or those you loved the most. Perhaps, like me, he has been forgotten, abandoned, or disregarded. But if there's one thing I can share, it's that life has a way of teaching us how to be stronger, and that it's never, ever too late to start over. I'm here, talking to you, because I know I'm not the only one. I know that, by telling my story, I can be a mirror for what many feel, and perhaps a hug for those who need strength. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, can it help me carry it forward? Like this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it, because just like me, you too can find your strength. I invite you to share in the comments which city you are watching. I like to think that every story here can connect with someone, and so, together, let's create a supportive community. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss it when the coffee is brewed again, because there is always something else waiting, and the next story, who knows, could be yours. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.